Thank you for coming tonight to hear Scott Gebicke. I'm Hank Hine. I'm the director of the Dalí Museum, and the Dalí Museum's very proud to receive Scott Gebicke tonight to talk about technology, industry, production, manufacturing, and culture. Scott has a really wonderful bio, but I have to admit there are places in it where I get a little confused. But I'm going to start where it's really clear and then try to end up where I think it's really clear also. Scott has dual bachelor's degrees in industrial engineering and business from Vanderbilt University. And as you know, Vanderbilt University is a hard place to get into, and it's hard to stay in. And if you have tough subjects like industrial engineering and business, ever the more so. Then Scott got an MBA from the London School of Business. He served in the U.S. Navy for 7 years. He was involved in combat issues, in weapons training, and had a lot of experience in maritime security. He also was involved in the security of the United States Embassy in London. Then Scott went to work for McKinsey, and he worked across the board in many business operations, including growth and innovation and reimagination of businesses. Then he came to work in our community and raised his family here. Now, here it just gets a little foggy because I was looking at his CV, and there's something about UAV propulsion, ultra-high mixed complexity, a wide range of renewables, grid-level solutions. Now, those of you in the audience may think that's perfectly clear, but I was an art major. But happily, as he begins working at Jabil, things get clear again, and he gets involved in the IoT, which of course is VSA, a very short acronym, and of course means the Internet of Things. And we are all enmeshed in that today. Scott is clearly a really big part of Jabil's ongoing success. He's also a member of the Board of Trustees of the Dalí Museum. He has a brilliant analytical mind in which he can identify both business, technical, and operational issues across the landscape of this technology in which we're all involved. So I'm really looking forward to hear what he tells us tonight, and please join me in welcoming this brilliant guy and my friend, Scott Gebicke.
That intro may be longer than my speech. So, when Hank called me and said, "Hey, would you mind giving a little talk at the Dalí? It'll be a happy hour thing," I was thinking 10 or 15 people and a nice couple of drinks, but I didn't realize we'd have a backup theater and a webcast going. So, thank you for having me. These are two topics which are really close to my heart, but I've never actually talked about them together. So this is going to be the first time I'm going to talk about them together. I'm going to leave a lot of open-ended questions because a lot of this technology is evolving and emerging. So any thoughts that you guys had, I'd love to hear them. We'll have some time for some dialogue and some questions and answers at the end. So with that said, I wanted to kind of introduce Jabil because a lot of times even people that live in the community, they've heard of it and they don't know what Jabil is. So for those of you that don't work at Jabil or haven't worked there, the bonus question is, does anyone know what Jabil stands for? Yeah, James and Bill. That's what you did when you started a company in the 60s in Michigan in your garage. You called it James and Bill, right? But it's important especially from an art context, because the Bill was Bill Morian. And if you guys are from the community, the Morian name is on a lot of buildings, including the Art Center, very philanthropic in the arts. So, again, Jabil's immersed in the community through the founders and continue to kind of be so. I'm going to walk. I feel kind of trapped up here, so excuse me. So we were founded in 1966. We're in 45 million square feet of manufacturing. I think we're up to 125, 130 sites, 230,000 employees, and over $25 billion in revenue. We like to joke we're the biggest company no one ever heard of. I'm showing a video here in a second, but we operate in everything from medical devices, implantable devices, to aerospace, to wind turbines, all the way into the iPhones and the things you carry in your pocket. So a huge diversity of things. We build products. We don't design and make products for the most part. So they don't have our name on it, which is why you probably haven't heard of it. So just to kick us off, because the rest of this is going to be a lot about the Dalí, a little bit about Jabil.
Constantly changing consumer demand, pervasive connectivity, network security concerns, supply chain constraints, acceleration of market disrupting technologies. These are just some of the forces adding complexity to doing business today, and that complexity is amplifying challenges and risk. Add to that complexity the unprecedented pressure to innovate, driven by rapid technology advancement and consumer expectations, and competitive pressures and evolving business models, forcing companies to move in the right direction with speed and agility. At Jabil, our people are our power. Drawing from the expertise and experience of the best engineering, manufacturing, and supply chain people in the business, our ideas, dedication, and passion help customers solve their most complex challenges. We leverage investments in innovation and capabilities that align to our customers' technology roadmaps, making it easy for them to turn innovative ideas into commercialized products with speed and success. Our technical expertise, product engineering, and process innovation combine to help customers clear product development and manufacturing barriers. Jabil is a proven ally. Our manufacturing know-how, combined with our ability to scale rapidly across the globe in numerous end markets, means we can deliver exponential impact and confidence. And amid unprecedented supply constraints, our intelligent digital supply chain enables ecosystem visibility and optimization, actionable risk management, and intelligent procurement. As the most technologically advanced and trusted manufacturing solutions provider, we innovate, design, develop, manufacture, deliver and service products, hardware, and equipment for over 300 of the world's best brands. And we do all of this while making the world a better place with the way we treat each other. Extend innovative solutions, give back to our local communities, and respect the environment. Jabil, simplifying complexity, delivering value.
So there's a lot of marketing and things in that, but I think what I wanted to kind of highlight is, and you can see it in the video, is the tremendous amount of breadth of technology that goes into that. Most of the technology that we have today, all around us, came either out of the government, the military back in the day, or out of the industrialists, right, and throughout time. And what's interesting for me about this talk is now we're moving from technology that was developed for a pure business or a military purpose or an industrial purpose is now being applied and is sometimes more advanced in the aesthetic appreciation of art or the development of art or things like that. So, I like to put the context of where things came from, and then we can talk a little bit about where they're going. So to paint that context, this is, you guys have all seen versions of this, but this talks about the number of years it took for each product to gain 50 million users. So that's a benchmark. Now, it's a little bit unfair. There weren't as many people back in the day, but it took 68 years for airplanes to have 50 million users, 62 years from automobiles. And this isn't from when they were invented, from when they actually started to operate. Now go to that second level. It took 12 years for cell phones to have 50 million users, 3 years for Facebook, and 19 days for Pokemon Go. So if you just think about the pace of technology, and if you think about technology as a loop, and it gets faster and faster, things are advancing out of control. You know, the positive way to think about that is things are getting better, things are getting more exciting. I had a professor that put it one way. He said, this just means you're getting dumber faster, right? If technology is advancing, what you don't know is actually becoming bigger faster than what you do know. So this is the impetus of what we're talking about. You know, all the technology we're going to talk about today, it was driven by these innovations and for these types of innovations. You know, starting in the manufacturing side and a little bit, and where I'm going to draw from this is, you know, in the 1900s to really for the first 100 years, it was all about capacity. It was about brick and mortar, low-cost labor, mass production. That moved into productivity, reducing waste, and then remote was actually going to lower cost locations, moving out of cities, moving into low cost countries. A lot of the stuff we hear in politics today is all about how US manufacturers went overseas. Over the last 9 or 10 years, we've really been moving more into capability. And the investments that we're making in manufacturing are around digital data. We'll talk about that today, the collection, the interpretation of data. Localized distribution, so being, you know, the Amazon effect, if you will, of having things closer, having things built and stored closer to where they're going to be delivered. Agile design and agile responsiveness of machines. Mass customization. Does everyone know what mass customization means? Mass customization is the difference between buying shoes that were designed a year ago and made 2 to 6 months ago in Bangladesh, to picking your shoe on the internet, designing it, and having it 3D printed down the street from you, right? So it's building things at scale, but building them for individuals. And then obviously knowledge workers, the ability for computers to start replacing and enhancing people and what they do. These are some of the technologies that have been really advanced in the last 9 or 10 years in manufacturing that are starting to be applied in the art world. Now, those are the technology development. Let's talk about how people, especially in the last 10 or 15 years, how people are consuming things. And by consuming, in the back of my mind when I did this, it was about art as well. People want a personalized experience, right? People don't want something that everyone can have. You see the having your name on a Nutella bottle, you know, and this would be ridiculous 5 years ago to think about that. Everyone's mobile and tech savvy. I mean, you saw the number of users of mobile phones. People want informed choices. They don't want to just take one recommendation. They want to have comparisons. They want those comparisons to be transparent. Peer-to-peer choices. You want to not only know what experts say, you want to know what your friends say. You want to have your network, your people. My people told me to do this, so therefore it's my peers. And, you know, kind of the frustration if you hear anyone talk about this generation, and no offense to the younger people in the crowd, but the millennials, is this instant gratification, right? The idea that you have to wait more than 35 minutes for your soup to be delivered to your couch, and that's too much, is something, you know, that would, you know, for those of us on the older side in the room would be kind of unheard of. So, you know, as you think about these, just think about what that means for Hank and his staff, where they take an artist, a single artist museum, a very prolific, a fantastic artist, and they think about how do we teach this to people who are used to consuming information and data in these ways. And it creates an incredible challenge to how do you maintain relevance, and how do you maintain interest, and you have to be able to consume the art in different ways. And to kind of break that down into to structure a little bit what I want to talk about, this lays out, you know, the specific technologies in production, and then I'll talk about in art. For the first 60 years, probably further back than that, data was stored on paper. Mechanical tools were about the most advanced as you can get, and you had kind of assembly line manufacturing was the big innovation. Moving into the 60s, you started having computing, mainframe computing. Remember, you didn't have electricity everywhere until going past World War II. Wireless technology allowed you to communicate not by being in the same room or not by having a hard line and infrastructure. Moving into the 90s, so again, 30 years later, you start getting into robotics, a huge amount of robotics and things like the automotive industry started moving to robotics. Artificial intelligence and automated systems, so systems that could actually do stuff on their own, could figure out how to recalibrate themselves. You had mobile and cellular, meaning you could start communicating outside of not having a huge antenna. And you had additive manufacturing, which meant you started to be able to build things in a way other than, had been happened for thousands of years. Either you whittle something down from a big block or you build it up from smaller pieces. Those are the only two ways to build something. Now you have this way of building something where you can almost build it from the inside out. And that creates agile design, which I'll talk a little bit about, which is more rapid design, came around in software. Artificial intelligence and agile design is actually having machines design things. Lights out factory being fully automated. They have factories where you just basically program it and it runs. You don't even have to be there, so the machines can learn and calibrate themselves. And you're moving into almost virtual design and test. So rather than having to actually build a product, the machines are sophisticated enough to take a design and understand if that design is going to meet the need, right? So, I'm going to talk a little bit more about agile design and AI in relation to these two. Let's talk about the art world. Parallel, similar timeline. Art, back to the beginning of time, or paper, right, Hank? You're the art major. You can correct me on this. It was stored on paper or whatever medium. It was in clay or pottery or going all the way back. It was one of a kind. It was hand reprints, right? If you wanted to duplicate something, they had teams of people that would copy them, and they would have reprints. Minimal authentication. If the artist signed it and an expert said it was a signature, it was authentic. In the 60s, you moved into digital display of art. Think about it. We don't think about it, but it wasn't that long ago that you could only look at art on a piece of paper or a photograph of it. You couldn't actually pull it up on a screen. I think we get a little bit corrupted by the internet in that. Moving into the 90s, you started having digital art education. You started having digital authentication, having computers check if something's authentic. A little bit in there, you started to be able to X-ray through paintings and do special things to see actually how they were constructed. And really in the 2000s, and you'll see this today, is virtual reality and actually immersing yourself in art. How does that evolve in the future? Personalized art experience, being able to go to a museum and actually having a personalized experience designed for you, that's not just you wandering around and reading things on a thing, but actually designing to what you're interested in and what you want to do and interacting with you. Sensory enhanced. Those of you that haven't tried the virtual reality, I'll show a small demo of that in a minute. Think about people being able to experience, now we've been able to experience a two-dimensional piece of art, now in three-dimensional. You can immerse yourself in it. What about the other senses? What about smell, touch, feel? Talk about bringing art to people that are sensory deprived or neurodiverse. You can expand art experience to a whole different group of people. And then you also have digital dynamic galleries. And you'll see a little bit about what we'll talk about today, and one of the more sensitive topics around augmented reality, which I'll talk about the difference, is you could have a whole gallery that doesn't have original works of art. It's all augmented reality, and it's pulling things down, and have a similar art experience. So, I'm going to dive into a little of those a little bit more. Is anybody, any questions? Does that make sense, everybody? So let's talk about augmented reality. And I struggled. I have 3 of these I'm going to dig into. I struggled with which one to put first. Augmented reality is, really enhances the real world with digital information and media. 3D models, videos that are overlaid in real time. We talk about 3 different things, and I had to put this definition up because you'll see 2 different things at the museum, and it's important to know the distinction. Virtual reality. Does everyone know what virtual reality is? Can you hold up the headset? Look in the back. Virtual reality is putting on a headset and immersing yourself in another digital world. You are gone. Nothing you see and do is part of the real world. Augmented reality is when you can overlay a digital world on top of the world you're in. And you'll see if you go up to the main exhibit today and use the Dalí app on your phone, you'll be able to see the masterworks, and they will actually start moving around in front of your eyes. If someone walks in front of you, you will still see their head walk in front of you. You're not going to fall over the railing. You're not wearing goggles. You're actually still in the real world. And then mixed reality is where you can actually interact with the digital world, touch and move it, but still be in the real world. And there's companies called Magic Leap that we work with that are starting to do that. The technology is very nascent. It's still, in my opinion, it's still's got a lot of kinks to work out, especially on the design side. The hardware works fairly well, but people don't know how to write software for it, and so it hasn't really advanced. In the production, we're still really, really new in figuring out how to use this in production. Theoretically, you can use this for preventative maintenance. So what you have in the lower left is you look and it has sensors on that you can scan immediately and see if the machine's operating correctly, if something's too hot, if there's too much pressure. On the second one is actually, that's instructions for how to build an engine. So it's actually overlaying instructions on top of an engine to teach them how to build it. We experiment with this stuff at Jabil all the time. We're constantly trying to figure out how do you make a worker's job easier. And a lot of this you see on the right is you don't think of robots replacing people. It's how do robots help people do things better or faster. And it's really hard. It's really expensive. And it also is not always as effective as a human brain because you can only program so much. And so think about that for art, and I'll show some examples. How is augmented reality transforming the arts? Will it reinvent the way we experience art? So will a two-dimensional print on oil, that people have been celebrating for hundreds of years, will that no longer be relevant unless something jumps out at you? And is AR changing the museum? Are museums with simple two-dimensional prints, are they going to become obsolete? Is it going to have to be an immersed experience, right? And the really exciting thing is Dalí, this museum, is actually leading the way in this. And I make the argument very strongly that Hank and his team are actually pretty far ahead of us in manufacturing. Just watch this for a second. So this is one of the 8 masterworks that is on display. And if you haven't been up there with your phone to take a look at it, this is what happens when you look at a masterwork, a two-dimensional piece of art. This is what happens on your phone. What that is right there is that is the grid and the matrix which Dalí used to actually paint this painting, right? So this is what our exhibit is about now. Is we took 8 masterworks. We have about 5 to 10 minutes of content on each of them. You download the Dalí app, you go and you learn and you see things that you never would have picked up on if you just go do it. It's basically the equivalent of having a private docent walk you around and spend 8 or 10 minutes on each of the masterworks. So think about it, it's about an hour and a half worth of knowledge. You could call it a digital docent, you could call it something else, but this is a whole different way of experiencing art. And Hank, I mean, you've been here a long time. I mean, it would take you to learn this on your own, what you can just pull up on your app, would take you years of studying Dalí, just to get the impression of how he did things and what he did. So it's really exciting. And that's, remember in the scheme of things, I talked about the 3, that's augmented reality, right? That is, you are looking at an actual painting. When you hold your phone under it, it starts to move. What I'm going to show now is what you can see through those lenses. This is virtual reality.
Delirious materia. My delirium is injected and sublimated in these rocks. sabes si soy un cantante, un actor de cine, un gordo, un escritor, no sabe bien.
I'm not going to play the full 5 minutes of that. But how many of you have experienced that virtual reality here at the Dalí? Okay, if you haven't, there's a demo in the back, correct? I also if you have your own device, you can download it, correct? Right, Beth? No? Yeah, but if you have the device at home, you could. If you have the device at home, you can actually use it. I don't have one, so I don't. Beth can tell you how to do it. But they also have 3 up in the museum. Right, so I highly encourage you to come during the week because it gets pretty busy. The line backs up, but it's pretty amazing. If you thought that was impressive, that's just the YouTube version. Imagine what that's like to be completely immersed, to be able to look down. You're in a chair that spins 360 degrees. It's an entirely different way to experience art. And the question is, does that dilute the art? Does it enhance the art? And I think if, Hank and I were having this debate, I think at 10 o'clock last night, if you look at the main functions of arts of contrast, perspective, color, things like that, you're changing all 3 of those. So actually what you've done is you've created an entirely different piece of art that's based on the concept of, a Dalí painting, which is pretty interesting. So next one that is interesting. Artificial intelligence. Okay? Artificial intelligence, it's at the top level, it's quite simple. It's the ability of a computer program or a machine to think and learn. The not said there is like a person. There's a few things underneath that that start to get a lot more complicated and difficult to discern. Neural networks, which is basically connecting networks like biology, so being able to kind of do it like the human brain would interact, like evolution works. Deep learning, the ability of computers to actually go and take unstructured data. Natural language processing, and what I'm going to show you in a minute, you can get, but that's Siri, that's the ability for a computer to actually dissect your language and have a conversation. This is interesting because this was one of the first tests of AI. Does anyone know what the first test of AI was? The first go ahead. What's that? Yeah, well, what did he do? Yeah, the benchmark, you're exactly right. The benchmark was if you could have a conversation or an online chat with a computer for 15 minutes, I forget what the time length was, and think it was a real person, then that was successful artificial intelligence, right? And that was the benchmark for a long time. We use a lot of artificial intelligence at Jabil. And those of you at Jabil, don't debate me on how much of it's AI, how much of it's data analytics. But we do a lot of predictive analytics and algorithms on the supply chain side. So these are the materials that we buy and we bring in. What you're seeing here is actually we have feeds from weather forecasts. If there's tsunamis or earthquakes, it automatically does an assessment of what the best new supply chain solution is based on the destruction of factories. We learned that the hard way when the Japanese tsunami 10 years ago. So that's in supply chain. In production, as far as machine learning, we still have a long way to go. We're still learning, pun intended. But for this, so think about it this way. Think about it, you have 2 machines, and one machine's measuring the placement of something, the other machine's placing it. If the second machine can automatically see that the placement is slowly shifting off, but it's still within tolerance, it can go back to the first machine and tell the first machine to recalibrate itself, right? So that's not only machine learning, which it's got a small thing, but it's also taught machine-to-machine communication. So those are the types of things that we're experimenting with, and you know, we're still very much in the early stages. You know, and there's a couple, but if you draw that to art, what are the things that come out? You know, what does artificial intelligence do to human creativity? Is this going to destroy human creativity? Are humans just going to be programmers for the machines to do the thinking? Or on the flip side, will artificial intelligence give us the next great art movement? We'll be able to do concepts of art that human beings could never think of. And is AI, and this is one of the things I want to debate with Hank at the end, is AI blurring the definition of an artist? If an artist is using computer-generated, you know, CGI to do things, if they're using computers to do models, to do simulations, are they still an artist? Because they don't know how to paint, they don't know how to draw. I think it's a real debate, right? And I think there's at least two competing theories here. A couple things. Probably now. Is this ready to go? It's ready. Okay. The one on the left is, I don't find it aesthetically pleasing personally, but this was the first piece of AI art. 430,000, completely generated by a computer. Now the interesting thing is, if you dig into a computer, the computer I think was called ACAN that generated this. They programmed the computer with 80,000 different pieces of art. 80,000 different pieces over 500 years. And they told the computer two things. Your art has to base itself on the work of the masters. I'm probably oversimplifying millions of lines of code, so bear with me, right? But you have to do something that takes into account what you've seen, the work of the masters, but it does something different. So they basically programmed the computer to do something different. So I have no idea which masters influenced that and why that's something different, but basically it programmed the computer to do what artists do. And every artist that wants to be relevant learns how to do something from what they've known, then they try to branch out. And you can see that a lot with what Dalí's done in the museum. So this is kind of, the first one is kind of artificial intelligence as the artist. And I'm going to try, if this works, to go here. And those of you in the theater.
The true painter must be able with the most usual things to have the most unusual ideas. For example, nobody before me had the idea of painting a melting watch. The day I discovered the key to art, I fell to my knees and thanked God, with both knees on the ground and hands together. All my ambition on the pictorial level consists of putting on canvas with the most imperial fury of precision the images of concrete irrationality.
That's one of the least offensive things he says. I'm going to try one more just out of curiosity. If you guys don't mind, you guys mind?
The whole future of Dalí is explained in the brother painting. It's the complete autobiography of Dalí. Is the most important work of my life. Is so good, my wife Gala, when she see, make pee-pee, and also excrement. Each day, I find it more difficult to understand how other people can live without being Gala or Salvador Dalí. If you need pee-pee now, it's down the hall.
Here's kind of the scary part about this is I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Dalí actually said everything in these things. What he never did is said them on video. And what you're seeing is, and again, I'll get some of the specifics a little bit wrong, but loaded all the known images of Dalí's face, all the known images of his mannerisms, all the known videos of him, because they do have videos of Dalí. And then they basically did a voiceover of it, and the computer learned how to talk and do mannerisms like Dalí. So that's actually Dalí's face as created by images. It's actually Dalí, images of Dalí, but he's saying things he hasn't said before. So if you think about it, the computer actually learned to talk like and look like Dalí with the images that they had. Now I know, some people are like, well, that's kind of boring. You can't even talk to it. If you think about taking just the amount of computing power it takes to get to this level of replication, of taking the thousands of hours of videos and I don't know how many still images, the next level to get it to interact and react to it is a whole different level, not only monetarily, but also in experience-wise. So, I think this shows a little bit of cutting edge of technology, but also that it's still got a long way to go to be a merged reality Dalí standing in front of you, the holograms you would see from Superman and things like that. And again, I highly encourage you to interact with Mr. Dalí here. He's interesting. So the last one I want to kind of talk about is about design, and this is a little bit more challenging because it's a little bit less tangible. But I grabbed kind of agile and adaptive design. So agile design, and you software folks in here, don't beat me up about this. But it basically came out of the software world, and typical design and hardware is you have a need, you have a specification, you have a prototype, you have a design, you have a test, you have a validation. It's very linear, right? And you just do that, and it's all about the specification, right? All about the specification. Agile design, the specification is as dynamic as the prototype. So basically, you're designing the specs as you're building the prototype, and you could call this rapid failure, you could call this sprinting, as it's called up there. So it's very rapid loops, which attempt to solve a problem without doing a linear problem solving, right? That in itself is just a problem-solving methodology, but the technology that goes into it, and as I talked a little bit about before, if you think about that from a mechanical design and development, it used to be really hard to build a very complex piece of metal. You had to do a whole design, you had to do tooling, you had to invest a huge amount of money, then you had to test it to see if it works. With 3D printing, you can come up with a design very, very quickly, a blind channel design, a design that has gears that are interlocked that you couldn't build actually yourself, and you can test that, right? So we now have technology which allows you to design much more rapidly and allow you to apply this agile thinking into the way we design products. One of the things I think they just did, which was fascinating, is they took one of Da Vinci's bridge designs from 400 years ago, 500 years ago, and they built a 3D model of Da Vinci's design that they hadn't been able to do, and they built a number of prototypes, and they actually found out that it would have worked, right? It would have structurally worked. And of course, no one's going to build a Da Vinci bridge just to see if it works, right? But for 3D printing, you could do that. So, Dalí was someone that broke paradigms too. And one of the things, and I don't have that video here today, but one of the things we do in the Dalí Innovation Lab is among other things, we have people draw a picture of Marilyn Monroe. And when everyone draws a picture of Marilyn Monroe, they start with her face. And they center her nose, and they draw eyes, and they then draw the rest of the body. And this is the iconic, subway pose. What Dalí says is the big toe is the center of balance and the center of everything having to do with the body. I think I'm probably saying that wrong. Start by drawing the big toe. If you draw the big toe, that'll give you the perspective to draw the whole body, and everything will kind of follow on top of that. So in a way, Dalí was breaking paradigms when he thought about his art, the same way that we're doing with 3D printing, right? You're thinking about designing from within, not designing top down. I think there's a big question. Is design changing the art world? Is the way people design things going to change? Is it no longer going to be about building something that you can only build with your two hands, but building something that has to be built by a computer, has to be built by a machine? Will changes in the design process changes the artistic approach? Will just like mechanical engineers are learning how to design for 3D print today and additive manufacturing, are artists going to learn how to design a different way? I'm not going to show it now just for time's sake, but there's a professor at Virginia Tech, and this is this lower right here, that was actually making very laser cut cardboard for another thing, for another purpose. And he saw that the laser cut cardboard, when they stacked the cutouts, when they stacked on top of each other, started to form patterns. So he started to create three-dimensional art, which were sequences of these cardboard cutouts, and he would have to think in the abstract. So he wasn't designing for what he was actually building, he was designing for what he cut out. And he built some flip books and things like that. It's quite fascinating to kind of take a look at how that could be applied. So we've got those kind of three. We've got those three different things. Augmented reality, virtual reality, artificial intelligence, and kind of design thinking, agile design thinking. And so as I thought, how do I kind of conclude this topic? I really realized there wasn't much of a conclusion. It's really still a debate, and I want to have that debate with you guys. But first, I wanted to think, what does Dalí think, right? So I started looking at some quotes from Dalí, and I actually found two quotes from Dalí, the same artist, and Hank can tell you probably the times. Maybe one was earlier or later than his career, but the first one is on the top. It says, "Begin by learning to draw and paint like the old masters. After that, you can do as you like. Everyone will respect you." And if you go to the museum and you learn a little bit about the history of Dalí, Dalí's known for his crazier stuff, that kind of personality, but he was an incredibly talented painter. He could paint with the masters, and if some of his bigger works, his masterworks, are amazing. The artistic impression is incredible. That top one would tell you that Dalí would view, computer-generated artificial intelligence, augmented reality as it's not pure, you can't do it, you got to learn how to properly do art with your own two hands. However, in the bottom, a true artist is not one who is inspired, but one who inspires others. And by this definition, Dalí's own definition, anything that inspires people, anything that creates people to see things differently, to feel differently, to think differently is art. So with that broader definition, anything, whether a dog or a person or a machine created art, would be kind of inspiring and therefore art. So I concluded with a few questions that I'm going to pose to this audience, and hopefully we have a debate. Will artists suffer the plight of the historic artisans, the laborers? So when factory workers back in the day, the stone workers, the mason workers, they were artisans. These guys were proud. They were replaced by machines. Will artists go that way to a degree or not? Is AI-generated art viable or contrived? Is writing a program that creates new art, is that art itself, or is the computer doing the art? I don't know. I mean, someone paid almost $500,000 for something that a computer built. So I mean, the market would tell us that yes, it is art. What do we think? Does augmented reality and virtual reality and in the future merged reality, does it dilute or enhance the artist experience? Is putting on those goggles and being able to go inside a Dalí painting, does that teach you more about the art than just looking at it in the brushstrokes and trying to see it, or does it dilute it? Or is it a new piece of art? Do AI-enhanced artists need to start as purists? So as someone that's studying art today and they're using a computer to help them with either color or perspective or something like that, do they have to learn how to draw and paint and do things, or not? Or can they jump straight to the disruptive technology? And can rapid design enhance the artist's perspective? So if you want to draw a painting and you draw part of it and you teach a computer to do the rest, and you say, I don't like that, I'm going to try again, is that an artist's perspective still, or is it enhancing it, or is it diluting it? I don't know the answers to these, right? I don't know I don't know where to even start beginning. So at this point, I'm going to ask the one person I do know that should know, which is Hank. So Hank, maybe you'll join me in kicking us off and giving us your thoughts on these topics. Hank needs a microphone here.
I do want to say that those are great questions, and it's great to have questions posed from the technology point of view rather than from the aesthetic point of view. There's an artist, he's not well known, but he's very interesting. He's a contemporary artist. His name's Richard Tuttle. And Richard said that art is an expression of what the conditions of being alive by that artist at a specific moment are. It's an expression of the conditions of being alive. So if you take that into sort of a natural intelligence format where you have artificial intelligence, maybe AI could create art that is a very true expression of what it's like to be a natural intelligence entity at that time. And that could be interesting, I think, from the human perspective to try to compare and contrast, to have a critical view of what makes us human. So I think I invite every experiment with technology to try to understand what it is that we make, and can it be more interesting made in other ways and with the augmentation of technology, or will it not be? Ultimately, I think each of us has this kind of compass, a kind of sixth sense about what's beautiful, what's meaningful, what tells us about ourselves, that from which we learn. So I don't know that there are any rules in this, and I really invite the question. And Scott, I think this question is really for this great group of people
what do you guys
who came
think?
out tonight. What do you think?
Yeah, go ahead. Here's the mic.
Got a mic for you.
This is a question to actually both of you, since you both are affiliated with this great museum. Just listening to all of this makes me wonder whether we're shifting from art as product to art as experience, and it makes me think about what that means for this museum, which I'm enjoying greatly, by the way. I just, listening to you, get the sense that we can actually experience Dalí very differently. We could almost even try to reconstruct his experience of creating some of those wonderful things we're seeing here. And that's a very different way of looking at what he does, than just looking at the end product. I'm sure these are things you are thinking about. I'm just sort of curious how these ideas are shaping your own thinking about the future of this institution.
Yeah, I'll start. One of the things, and Kathy Greif and Beth Bell, who did a lot of this with the Dalí, we always think of the misses. We have a lot of ideas about technology that we want to do. For example, a lot of Dalí's other works, we have the majority of them here are in Spain, right? Is there a way to experience virtually and digitally both museums at the same time? Can we link those together, right? Is there a way to, single artist, right? We have a museum, we can't ship these soon to be 100-year-old work of arts all over the world. They'll just get destroyed. So can we do that digitally? Can we do it virtually? And I think, we don't always look at the things we've done, like just that simple video of Dalí, the virtual reality, the augmented reality, the masterworks, which is just an amazingly different art experience. And we don't think of how progressive that is and how impressive that is, right? And I think, Hank and his team are constantly pushing the boundaries. We're continually kind of going out with partners, talking to folks like Microsoft, the IBM, the Jabils of the world, to figure out what's the next thing that we can do. I think it is about art experience, because in 20 years and 15 years, kids that are growing up now, my kids that are over in the corner, aren't going to want to just walk around a museum in the quiet with stuff in the walls. There's no way. The sensory overload they're getting everywhere else, and Hank, your kids too, they're not going to be able to do it. And we have to change the experience.
We do. That question is a central question. That is art an object, or is it an experience? And I would side with it being an experience, but that's a central question to the last era of art investigation. And there was a guy named Walter Benjamin who said that there is an aura that inhabits or surrounds an original work of art which disappears in mechanical reproduction. I think that's really questionable. If you've ever checked into a motel in Albuquerque and you see a George O'Keeffe print on the wall, it's fantastic. It's not the original work, but it has something, and I would call that an aura. So I think art is an experience, and there may be something unique to an object, to being in the presence of an object, but there's something much more powerful that inhabits the work of art that is translatable. And this is why we know that we can get coal and steel, your kids, interested in art, because we can give them digital interactive experiences that lower the threshold, that tell them, this is not something that you have to have specialized knowledge. This is something for you to engage with. And that's the stakes for us as a museum, to say, you know what, come on in. You don't have to know anything about art, but there's going to be a way for you to interact with this work, inquire of it, what its terms are, and leave your own thoughts behind as well.
Yep.
This gentleman in the back here, you're next.
Those lights are bright. Yeah. Say, I think we're all disappointed that we don't have a knockdown, drag-out disagreement between Scott and Hank. But having said that, I think Scott is one of the few people here who not only understands but uses and experiences AI. And I give credit to Hank for kind of anticipating that experience in his own world. So I think as more people experience and use and become immersed in AI, as your children will, I think the question answers itself. I think they will find art in what AI produces.
This gentleman has a mic.
Hi. So quick question. Did you consider both for manufacturing and for art another concept like augmented intelligence, which is same AI, but it is just enhancing human brain to the capacities of artificial intelligence, and potentially it solves layoffs in manufacturing or in economy. And for art, it potentially makes every person an artist. So you just tell what to create, and then just together with the enhanced ability of a brain, you just create something.
Yeah, you have a take on that?
I mean, it's a little bit sci-fi for me, right? I mean, just the, if you think about it, kind of what I said is, it's almost embarrassing for Jabil, as I introduced it, to say we're a $25 billion company, and an art museum in St. Petersburg, Florida, has better artificial intelligence, than we do. Now, that's saying, not to saying we haven't tried to invest it, it's just the technology is hard to keep up. And at the end of the day, and you guys, I know what you do, and other folks from Jabil, human beings are not machines, right? So it's hard enough to get a human being to just pay attention and kind of do what they're supposed to do for an hour or so. To start enhancing their brain and doing all these other things is like another world, right? So I think a lot of it is just helping people do the basics, helping people with their day-to-day jobs, helping them be able to think of a higher plane and not have to focus on mundane things. We're so nascent in that what you're talking about, I think, is, it's me taking a pill to be able to draw a Picasso. I just, too far out for me.
I think if I understand your question, it related to one of Scott's original questions was, will, artists be displaced as laborers and be supplanted by machines? The other is, will art making become ubiquitous? And, years ago, I lived in San Francisco, and I got on a bus with somebody I recognized as a famous poet. And I sat down next to him. It was the 30 Stockton bus in San Francisco. And it was Robert Duncan. And I said, there are a lot of poets in San Francisco, aren't there? And he said, I was trying to let him know I was one, you know. And he said, yes, there are 525. And I didn't know if I was the 25th or like he wasn't counting me, but there was another interesting joke in the New Yorker that by the year 2030, the most commonly reported occupation will be film producer in the United States. So everybody can make a video, everybody can do anything now. And I think that's really interesting. I think it's empowering. It's also confusing. And how do we sort, the wheat from the chaff? How do we use our critical capacity to find what's good, useful, and lasting in the midst of all that? So there's a liberation, but also a challenge in it, and nobody has figured out how to sort that out yet. Great question. Thank you.
Yeah, so I guess my question is actually related to that sort of sorting out between the good and the bad of art. And a lot of the parallels I see with this conversation does happen in music as well, with how I'm a millennial, I enjoy a lot of different music, and I know a lot of people don't. And it's in terms of like the beep, boop, bop music that is a lot of the times computer generated, and or it's quickly thought of without too much respect for the masters, you'd say, or respect of the master works. So I guess the point I want to bring up is that I appreciate the fact that this museum is a master work that is embracing the way forward in terms of artificial intelligence and augmented reality, because I think a lot of us will get left behind and if we don't offer more than just paintings on a wall. Yeah. So essentially, what I want to know is if this sort of respect for the masters needs to be there in order to create a great work, which you guys are asking. But I think for kids to see Dalí and see that the master, because I've taken a lot of art history courses, and I know my knowledge is my appreciation for it is a lot more now that I know more. So there's a lot of people that don't know, but they can still appreciate, but it's sort of that balance.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up the music point, because when we were in here dry running, that's exactly the point that you brought up, right, John? Yeah, I mean, that anyone can be a musician, right? And we were kind of talking about that, and I think my personal opinion is the music and art. You don't have to be able to play. Music is all about math and things like that. You don't have to be able to play Rachmaninoff, number 2, to then go on and do a mixer or do some DJing or sampling or something like that and make music. But I think you have to understand and you have to appreciate it, right? So, to me it's you don't have to learn how to paint like a master, but I think in order to kind of really embrace the art, you have to learn what they were doing and how they did it. It's like paying homage, right? I mean, to me, that's where I personally fall in on it. But at the end of the day, whether it's music, if it makes you move your feet and it makes you feel something, and it's art and it makes you feel an aura, then in my opinion, then enjoy it, right? Who cares where it came from, right?
Yeah, who cares?
Well, you do, right?
Well, no, I care where it comes from. You're arguing a sense, a disposition towards mastery, and I think we all share that to an extent. We have a prejudice towards, you got to pay your dues. You got to learn what you're engaged in. And I can almost imagine, two natural intelligence entities in a cartoon, like talking about this, like, you haven't paid your dues. You haven't studied enough data. You're not able to synthesize this kind of thought. And I think at every level we respect knowledge, we respect know-how. Dalí went to Freud, and he thought Freud would be really impressed with his wild images out of dreams. And Freud put in his notebooks that this eccentric artist, had some very odd images, but I'm highly interested in his skill to render reality. And it took that to impress him. It's the ability to use the tools that we as human beings with these odd appendages and minds that don't absolutely connect to our appendages, and to create artifacts. It's amazing ability, and I think we all end up respecting whatever skills we can conjure in our lives. I want to respect a certain skill, which is to connect technology and the arts, and you've addressed a really, obviously, diverse crowd here tonight, Scott. You've engaged them in questions of art and the destiny of art and the destiny of technology, and it's been a wonderful and wild conversation. I think we should let some people go home and let those stalwarts stay and badger us afterwards, if you're agreeable. Thank you, Scott. It was wonderful.
Thank you, everybody, for having me.